Drink it all. You won't feel a thing.
The story starts with an older man named Norm, the leader of a criminal organization. He holds a meeting with his son-in-law and other members of the group. During the meeting, Norm tells them to prepare for his departure because they still owe a large debt that must be paid soon. After the gathering ends, Norm and his men quickly leave and go to a slaughterhouse. There, he talks with the owner but becomes frustrated and tense when he finds out the factory has been struggling for a long time and still hasn't paid back the money owed to his group. Norm plans to take control of the factory, but the owner refuses to sign the papers, even though he had promised to repay the debt. Bull, who is with Norm, grows angry when he realizes the owner is trying to play games. Losing patience, Bull confronts the man and, after a short struggle, cuts off several of his fingers. The violent act forces the owner to sign the papers and give up the factory. On the way back, Bull notices that Gary, the team member who had lent the owner the money, is missing and starts wondering where he went. Gary was supposed to help with the situation, but when Bull asked questions, he and the rest of the team stayed silent. That night, Bull saw Gary's car parked in his driveway. Curious, he went to check and was shocked to find Gary having an affair with his wife, Gemma. Bull's sudden appearance startled Gemma, and in panic, she ran into their son's room without saying anything. Bull was heartbroken. He never thought his wife and close friend would betray him. Out of loyalty to Norm, he decided to stay quiet and keep Gemma's affair a secret, hiding his pain deep inside. In the days that followed, Bull kept his pain to himself and focused on caring for his son, Aiden. One day, Norm called him in for a private talk. During their conversation, Norm told Bull that he was the only person he completely trusted in the organization. But then came the painful part. Norm said that since Gemma had chosen to be with Gary, Bull had to let her go. Although Norm said he was truly sorry, he made it clear that Bull could no longer be part of the group. Bull calmly but firmly confronted Gemma and Gary, revealing that he had known about their affair for a long time. He explained that he had stayed quiet out of respect for Norm, the leader of their organization. Bull said that if it weren't for his loyalty to Norm, he would have dealt with things differently. He then stated he was ready to leave the group, but only if he could keep custody of his son, Aiden. However, Norm refused, saying Bull wasn't fit to care for the boy. Filled with anger and disappointment, Bull walked away, his heart heavy with pain and rage. The next day, Bull went back to his old house to pick up Aiden. Though he was always tough with his enemies, he was gentle and caring toward his son. Shortly after, his close friends Marco and Mike showed up with a message from Norm. They invited Bull and Aiden to join them on a trip to a nearby amusement park. At first, Bull refused, saying he wanted to cut all ties with the organization. But Marco convinced him, explaining that the trip was meant as a farewell gift from Norm to him and Aiden. Moved by their sincerity, Bull finally agreed to go. At the amusement park, Bull enjoyed spending time with Aiden, going on rides and walking around together. Later, Norm asked Marco and Mike to take Aiden on another ride so he could talk to Bull alone. Once Aiden was gone, Norm suddenly pulled out a weapon and led Bull to the parking lot, where Gary was waiting. Furious and full of resentment, Bull called Gary a failure and accused Gemma of being unfaithful and willing to betray anyone. Enraged by Bull's words, Norm hit him with the weapon and ordered his men to lock Bull in the trunk, clearly intending to punish him for insulting his daughter. They took Bull to an old, abandoned bus in a remote area. Suddenly, Gemma showed up and angrily confronted him for trying to take Aiden away. Their argument quickly turned intense, but then Norm stepped in and asked Bull a hard question: what would he do if someone took Aiden from him? With a cold look and a hard voice, Bull said he would kill anyone who tried. Hearing this, Norm realized how dangerous Bull could be. Not wanting to take any chances, he decided to act first. He ordered his men to pour gasoline on the bus, then knocked Bull unconscious with a bottle of vodka, preparing to go through with his plan to kill him. They left Bull inside the empty bus and set it on fire without hesitation. From a distance, Aiden crawled out of Gemma's car and screamed when he saw his father trapped in the flames. Panicking, Gemma pulled Aiden back into the car and drove away, leaving Bull behind. 10 years later, a familiar figure stood beside a pickup truck. It was Bull, alive and filled with determination to get revenge on those who betrayed him. With a carefully planned strategy, he made his first move. Stepping out of the truck, Bull coldly killed one of Norm's former associates, marking the beginning of his ruthless mission for vengeance. The scene shifts to the home of Norm's eldest daughter, Gemma's sister. When the wife turns on the lights, she's horrified to see her husband tied up, his face filled with fear. Her shock turns to terror when she sees Bull, someone she believed had been dead for years, standing in front of her. Bull coldly asks where Gemma and Norm are, mentioning their old abandoned house. Trembling, she insists she doesn't know, saying they haven't spoken in 5 years. But Bull doesn't believe her, remembering that she and her husband were the ones who provided the bus where Norm and his men tried to burn him alive. With cold determination, Bull kills both of them and continues his ruthless path of revenge. The next morning, an older Norm visits Gemma and Gary's new home for breakfast. He brings terrible news: Gemma's sister and her husband have been murdered. Furious, Gemma immediately suspects one of Norm's old enemies, but Norm denies it, saying he has no enemies left and suggesting the deaths might have been the result of a failed robbery. Meanwhile, Bull keeps moving forward, driven by his unending desire for revenge. This time, Bull came across a young boy, the son of Marco, one of Norm's men whom Bull believed had betrayed him. Bull told the boy to go home and tell his father that he would be waiting for him at a nearby park. Although hesitant at first, the boy followed his instructions and delivered the message. When Marco heard the name Bull, he was shocked. At first, he didn't believe his son's story, but soon fear and anxiety took over. Without wasting time, he called Norm to report what happened and warn him that Bull was coming for him. Norm ordered Marco to meet Bull and find out if he was really alive after all these years. Before leaving, Marco grabbed a knife and told his wife to lock all the doors and windows, warning her not to let anyone out until he came back. When he arrived at the park, he was shocked to see Bull standing there alive and real. Overcome with guilt, Marco lowered his head and apologized for betraying him, explaining that he had only done it because Norm had ordered him to. When Marco's wife began to worry about him, she suddenly received a call from his phone. Expecting to hear her husband's voice, she was horrified when Bull spoke instead. Terrified, she rushed to the park and, the next morning, found Marco's lifeless body. His death prompted Norm and Gary to visit Bull's mother's house. Seeing what had happened, they finally understood that Bull was still alive and was coming for revenge against Norm. Norm confronted Bull's mother, demanding to know where her son was. Though fragile, she stood her ground and said she didn't know, insisting Bull had vanished 10 years ago. Norm didn't believe her and threatened to kill her if she refused to talk. Hours after Norm and Gary left, Bull came home and found his mother dead. Heartbroken, he became even more determined to get revenge. His next target was Mike, one of Norm's former accomplices. Mike had just picked up his 2 children from school and was walking them home when he saw Bull waiting in a parked car. At that moment, it felt to Mike like he was seeing a ghost. Everyone knew that Mike, along with Norm and the others, had helped in the attempt to kill Bull years ago. Bull got out of the car, threatened Mike, and ordered him to get in, warning that if he refused, he would die. As they drove, a terrified Mike begged for forgiveness, pleading for the safety of his children. But Bull stayed cold and demanded to know where Gemma was, ordering Mike to tell him everything he knew. Confused and scared, Mike said he didn't know where Gemma was. He explained that he hadn't seen her in 3 years and suggested that Gary and Norm might know more. Losing patience, Bull gave him a clear choice. If Mike could convince Gary to meet him at the fairground, he and his children would be safe, but if he failed, Bull would kill them. While the terrified Mike tried to carry out the task, Bull took Mike's youngest child on a ride at the amusement park, acting as if nothing was wrong despite the fear hanging in the air. After a while, Mike told Bull that he had reached Gary, who was traveling with a waltz troupe. Hearing this, Bull decided to spare Mike and let him and his children go. But Bull didn't stop there. He went after Gary and eventually caught up with him. When they finally came face to face, Bull pulled out a knife, and Gary froze in terror, realizing he was standing before the man he once thought was dead. Bull made Gary play a video game while questioning him, repeatedly demanding to know where Norm and Gemma were. Gary lied, saying he and Gemma had split up 6 years ago and that he didn't know where either of them was. Bull saw through the lie and left Gary badly injured. Even though he still hadn't found Gemma or Norm, his determination remained strong. Refusing to give up, Bull kept searching for answers. One night, his search led him to a nightclub where he uncovered a drug trafficking operation. Remembering that Gemma had once struggled with a serious drug addiction, Bull captured one of the couriers and forced him to give up information about her. Believing the courier might know where she was, Bull ordered him to lead the way. Terrified, the courier finally took him to one of the city's biggest drug dealers. Bull asked the dealer if Gemma was one of his clients, and the dealer agreed to tell him, but only for a price. Bull agreed to the deal but asked for a drink first. Then, losing patience, he suddenly pulled out a knife and sliced off the dealer's hand, leaving him in agony. Bull ruthlessly questioned him until the dealer finally gave in. After losing his arm, the dealer begged for his life and promised to take Bull to Gemma's house if Bull spared him. Bull agreed, and they set off together. When they arrived, Bull found Gemma asleep. He woke her abruptly, causing her to panic. Shocked to see him alive, Gemma dropped to her knees and begged for forgiveness. But Bull stayed cold and ordered her to call Norm right away, leaving her no other choice. Moments later, Norm walked into Gemma's house with a weapon in hand, not realizing Bull was waiting with a knife. In a tense standoff, Bull quickly overpowered him. Once Norm was pinned down, Bull pressed a pillow against his neck and demanded that Gemma tell him where Aiden was. Gemma begged him to stop, but Bull stayed cold and relentless, determined to get the truth no matter what. In a burst of anger, Bull screamed Aiden's name, which made Gemma panic. Terrified, she finally confessed that Aiden, the son she had abandoned, was living under a bridge downtown. Out of patience and filled with rage, Bull killed Gemma that night. The next morning, he went to the bridge and found Aiden. He took the boy with him and brought him to a nearby church. At dawn, a deputy arrived at the church, looking for any trace of Bull. Deputy Cheryl was actually Bull's former mother-in-law, who had divorced Norm before Aiden was born. When she opened the church door, she was shocked to find Aiden lying unconscious on the floor. The sight filled her with fear and suspicion. Cheryl had believed Bull died 10 years ago, and his sudden return made her question his intentions. Cautious but curious, she confronted him. Bull calmly explained that he hadn't come for revenge. This time he had come to protect and save Aiden. When Cheryl looked into Bull's dark eyes, she suddenly understood the horrifying truth. He had actually died 10 years ago when Norm and his men burned him alive on the bus. Yet somehow he had come back, driven by vengeance and the desire to protect Aiden. Before leaving, Bull asked Cheryl to take care of Aiden and thanked her for her help. With a cold and determined look, he walked away, leaving behind a story filled with mystery and shock.